I'm Brad Edwards. Thank you for joining us here on the stream, CBS News Chicago. Somber morning here for the city of Chicago. If you want to take a look, if we can take that full screen right now. We believe the casket carrying the body of young officer Areanah Preston, 24 years old, being loaded on to that ambulance right now, being flanked by many fellow officers, several from the 5th District. Of course, we all know the story by now. That young officer, Areanah Preston, was shot in Avalon Park in an incident that happened over the weekend. Held up in a robbery, shot multiple times in the chest. That just after she clocked out of work. Served the city for not long enough, but several years. Also graduated from law school, or was to, in the coming days. This escort will take place from the medical examiner's office, go northbound on Levitt to Harrison, then ultimately go to Western Avenue, be on Western Avenue for several miles to 103rd Street, where we'll end at the Blake Lamb Funeral Home. That's in Oak Lawn. I'm again Brad Edwards here in the studio. I'll be joined by several of my cohorts who will have this covered throughout the procession, including my cohort in the sky, Derek Peters, up in Chopper 2. Derek, what can you tell us about the scene right now?
Good morning, Brad. Yes, as you said, you outlined the route there, and unfortunately, it's a route we know well. It's one that we've had to travel far too often in recent months, as it is a route that has been traveled by fallen heroes of the Chicago Police Department and the Chicago Fire Department alike. As you said, Levitt to Harrison, and then the long stretch down Western Avenue. It's about an 11.5-mile stretch that we will be traveling down Western Avenue. It will take us through many different facets of life in Chicago down Western Avenue, through residential areas, through commercial storefronts, through schools, through daycares, through places of worship. And as the body of the fallen CPD hero, Areanah Preston, travels that route, you'll see everyday citizens from all walks of life in Chicago come out to pay their respects to this fallen hero. What we're seeing now is kind of the logistical end of these processions, and it does take quite a bit of coordination when you have as many vehicles that will be involved in the escort. They all have to line up in an orderly fashion, and they have to coordinate the closing of the street so that the procession can progress down Western Avenue. So that's what we're seeing right now. This ambulance, Fire Department ambulance number 37, is the ambulance that will be bearing Areanah's casket as she makes this travel down Western Avenue and to the Blake Lamb Funeral Home. The route today will not take us by her home in Avalon Park, and not scheduled to take us through any of the streets that she patrolled as a member of Chicago Police District 5. District 5 is a wide-ranging district. It covers as far north as 95th Street, as far south as the border with Dolton at 138th Street. It covers sections of Roseland, Pullman, and Calumet Park. But this route, as I said, Harrison to Western for about 11.5 miles, then on to 103rd, where she will travel then to the Blake Lamb Funeral Home at 103rd and Cicero. Derek Peters, Chopper 2. Brad, I'll send it back to you.
Okay, Derek, thank you. We will be checking back with you momentarily. As Derek said, the destination here for ambulance 37 that you saw there, fire department ambulance 37. The ultimate destination for the time being will be from the medical examiner's office, where you see now, to the Blake Lamb Funeral Home. That's in Oak Lawn. We know that Officer Preston, just 24 years old. Here's some video of her pictures recently from Instagram. There she is, the soon-to-be law school grad. Beautiful young woman with such a future. She was shot around 1:42 Saturday morning in the 8100 block of South Blackstone. She was described by one of her mentors as a humble, dedicated, helpful, sophisticated soul. It's quite a cadre of adjectives. Speaks to someone who not only has a heart of service, but certainly portends a great future. Here we are now live back to Chopper 2 as they set up the procession. And as Derek Peters said moments ago from Chopper 2, this is logistically, it takes a lot for Ambulance 37 to get from here to the ultimate destination in Oak Lawn. The lion's share of that will be along Western Avenue. One of my cohorts joining me in the stream this 10 a.m. hour on a Tuesday as we wait for this procession to begin, this escort for Officer Preston, is Mugo Odigwe. Mugo, well, where are you? What can you tell me?
Hey Brad, we are right in front of the medical examiner's office this morning, and I'm just taking a guess here, but I believe we are getting closer and closer to when that procession is going to start. And I say that because within the last 5 minutes, we have seen this large group of police officers and officials getting out of the medical examiner's office, many of them going into the vehicles you see out here. I'm going to step out of the way just to give you a sense of what things are looking like. It is a long line of police cars, flashing lights, just lining the street here on Harrison Street and Levitt. And what you can't see on the other side, because then we'd have to move the other way, but what you can't see, just trust me here when I say, further down the street on the other side, also a long line of police cars flashing, and we have seen those officers who all went back into their vehicles, which is exactly why we believe that procession will be starting shortly. All morning we've been talking about Officer Preston. Brad, and you mentioned she was only 24 years old. She had served the Chicago served with the Chicago Police Department for about 3 years. Again, we've seen some cars moving down here. We want to show you that. So it does look like the procession is starting at this point, because these police cars were just standing still for a bit there. And then we saw all of those officers who came out of the medical examiner's office and then started getting into their vehicles. So at least it's starting partially. We do see other cars on the other side of the street here on Levitt that are not moving just yet, but again, we do believe this should be starting. Brad, as I was saying, Officer Preston, 24 years old, had served the city of Chicago as a police officer for 3 years, but unfortunately, we know she died on Saturday. This was around 1:42, as you said, Brad. She had just finished her shift over at the 5th District where she served, and she was yards from her home when she was shot and eventually died at the hospital. Something else that we know about her, you showed those pictures, which really gives you a sense of who this woman was. She was very dedicated to her job, stunning, I should mention, and also was working on her master's degree. You saw those pictures of her with her graduation cap and her graduation gown. She was working on her master's degree in jurisprudence over at the Loyola University School of Law, and they said she was going to graduate this coming Saturday on May 13th, but obviously she didn't get to see that, which is just so unfortunate here when you think of the dedication that she must have had to try to get a master's degree. We all know that is not an easy feat, and yet that is something that she was working on. Again, we have seen several police cars move away from this area. I'm going to step this way, and if our photographer Dino can pan to the other side, these are some of the unmarked police cars. We did see several people exiting the medical examiner's office and entering these police cars that we see out here. You see the lights are flashing, waiting for them to move because the other cars out here have moved. So again, Brad, we're thinking that this procession should be starting any minute now, and the goal is to make it over to the Blake Lamb Funeral Home, and where the body of Officer Preston is being led to that area. And really, I think that we often cover situations like this, which are completely unfortunate, but it always hits you when you see the picture of the person we're referring to, when you see the picture of the officer, and then in this case you learn she was only 24 and had years ahead of her. And just to imagine someone who's 24 years old and decided to be a police officer, decided to serve the city. Imagine the fact that she started likely when she was 21, because she has served for 3 years. Again, giving you a perspective here of the type of woman that she was and the dedication that she had and the sacrifice, ultimately the sad sacrifice she had to make in this situation. Again, as I mentioned, we're just looking at the scene right now. That procession should be starting. Some police cars rather, with officers have moved down the street on Harrison. We do see some lining out here on Levitt, and I'm going to send it back to you. As soon as we see more movement in this area, we'll let you know. Brad.
Okay, Mugo, thank you. And you are indeed correct. Officer Preston, beautiful in likeness and in spirit, as we see CFD ambulance number 37 about to make their procession here, beginning in the medical district from the medical examiner's office. From there it will be a slow roll to Oak Park, to the funeral home. We've spoken with a lot of people who knew this young, vibrant 24-year-old. As Mugo noted, just what a remarkable feat. You know, served the city for 3 years, ultimately paid the ultimate sacrifice, but during that time got a college degree. During that time, then got her Juris Doctorate. Her master's in law was to graduate officially on Saturday. You can see ambulance number 37 there, just at the beginning of this trek. It will mainly be along Western Ave to 103rd Street. 10, 11 miles. First it makes a quick turn there onto Levitt, then to Harrison. The loss of Preston hits home for one former police supervisor, Sadia Carter. She actually coached Officer Preston's high school cheerleading team. She was too upset to speak on camera, but she wrote to CBS 2 a message that said, "I did everything to always keep the police in a positive light with the kids. My heart is hurting. My children spent time with this beautiful young lady, but I'm also angry." End quote. Angry that that young lady is now a body in ambulance number 37 being escorted to a funeral home. So the procession is now going. I now believe they're on Harrison, soon to hit Western Avenue, where the lion's share of this will take place. Well, we've gone over the details, but it is worth noting again, she had just clocked off from her work serving the South Side in the 5th District. She arrived home. She was confronted, I'm told, sources say, by a number of robbers. 1:42 a.m. she was shot. Saturday in the 8100 block of South Blackstone Avenue in the Avalon Park neighborhood. There are also some questions we have raised, and we'll get into further detail about just how long and why it took so long for authorities to respond to her shooting. Some 31 minutes from when ShotSpotter caught the sound of gunshots to potentially the desperate attempt to save her life, which was, of course, unfruitful. As we now see, I believe, the turn onto Western Avenue. I believe from here they'll be headed south. Not as directionally sound as our friends in Chopper 2, but south on Western Avenue to 103rd, to the Blake Lamb Funeral Home in Oak Lawn. There will also be an event held today at the 5th District, I am told. Many of her brothers and sisters in blue are also, of course, in this procession. We saw her casket being taken into ambulance number 37 about 15 minutes ago. And now we are on our way. And we have talked, and as our friend in Chopper 2, Derek Peters, so appropriately put it, we have seen this procession all too often, especially in recent weeks and months here in the city of Chicago, from the medical examiner's office to you name the community, be it for first responder, police officers, or most recently, first responder firefighters. On that note, let's send it up to Chopper 2 and our friend Derek Peters. Derek, where are you, and what is the situation like from the sky there?
Well, Brad, we're just repositioning here. The procession has moved south on Western Avenue, south of Roosevelt now, as they continue south all the way to 103rd Street down Western Avenue. We are navigating Midway's airspace, so we have to be respectful to our neighbors in the sky as we watch this procession proceed southbound on Western Avenue. One of the things that I always struggle with as a photographer in situations like this is really capturing the full scope of the procession. The impulse is always to keep the focus on the lead vehicles, in this case ambulance number 37 that is transporting Areanah Preston's body in this case, but the real impact of these processions is when you widen out the camera and show just how many of her CPD brothers and sisters have come out to participate in the procession directly, to be in the line of cars proceeding southbound on Western Avenue as she heads to Blake Lamb Funeral Home, but also her brothers and sisters that are in charge of traffic control, shutting down the side streets as they proceed down Western Avenue. One of the things you'll see as we continue south on this route, as we pass by streets that are shut down, the officers and the personnel that are there doing traffic control will salute as Officer Preston's body is transported by. We will see that anytime an officer goes, sees the procession pass them, as well as from any fire department districts that we pass by and any police departments that we head by. So continuing south now on Western Avenue, Brad, you and Mugo have done such a wonderful job talking about some of the details that we know about young Officer Preston's life. In this situation, we come to it as outsiders. We're not personal friends, family of Officer Preston, so what we have to go on are little breadcrumbs, little nuggets from Officer Preston's life and works. And in this case, those breadcrumbs really come together to tell a very clear picture of an extremely motivated young woman, one who cared deeply about affecting positive change in her community, who was trying to better not only herself, but everybody around her, as pursuing education, as you said, just days away from graduating with that Master's of Jurisprudence from Loyola University here in Chicago, and joining the Chicago Police Department to help bring some positive change to the neighborhoods that she knew and loved. We'll continue to bring you the sights from the skies here, and one of the things in particular I want to draw your attention to is, as the procession continues, watch the sidewalks, watch the curbs. That's where the everyday people from Chicago come out to honor your fallen officers on processions like this. It's particularly heartwarming to me when you see the procession go by a school or a daycare, and you see all the young children come out from their studies and watch as the procession goes by. You can see the look on their faces of awe and wonder as you see the lights and the sirens pass by them, and you can see the spark of inspiration in their eyes as they start to wonder about the hero that caused all of that spectacle that they see going past them. So if we pass by a school or a daycare, I will zoom the camera in and show you that as we continue now to proceed south down Western Avenue. Brad, I'll send it back to you.
Derek, some very thoughtful comments. We thank you for that, as you and Chopper 2, of course, delicately also work the airspace there in deference to our friends at Midway Airport. This is the procession taking place for Chicago police officer Areanah Preston. Her body being escorted by CFD ambulance number 37 from the medical examiner's office to the Blake Lamb Funeral Home at West 103rd and Oak Lawn. As Derek Peters just said, traveling now south on Western Ave. This will be the lion's share of the travel. It is a remarkable scene, and one so full of reverence, not only when you see the breadth and the depth of how many officers and first responder vehicles they are, but you think of all the others that have been halted just on their morning commute or mid-morning, going to an appointment, going to this, going to that, and they realize they're all of a sudden amidst this solemn ceremony for this young woman who had simply so much promise. 24 years old, police officer for 3 years. Got an undergrad, then got her master's in law, certainly with that tenacity one would presume would have gotten her law degree. No problem. There's a Blake Lamb Funeral Home on the left in the smaller box. That's the destination. That is 103rd and Oak Lawn. Again, Preston who in the midst of her work as a Chicago police officer was indeed getting her law degree, punched out of work from the 5th District, which serves Roseland, Pullman, several other South Side communities. Was shot around 1:42 a.m. on Saturday in the Avalon Park neighborhood, literally yards from her home. Confronted, apparently, from what sources tell me, randomly targeted for robbery. Was shot a number of times. And we don't know if it's a moot point or not. But there was a delay. A certainly unintended delay, but one of 30 minutes between when the young 24-year-old was shot and when officers were finally able to get on scene, despite the warnings from shot spotter, etc. Investigator Megan Hickey learned that shortly after 2 a.m. after the shooting, it appears that the officer's Apple Watch sent out a distress call alerting 911. It was at that point in time, or soon thereafter, that authorities knew they had, in some way, shape, or form, an officer down. We're told there was a desperate attempt to save her life, but that the young officer eventually succumbed to multiple gunshot wounds. She is survived, we know, by a loving family and survived by her brothers and sisters in blue, and today survived by a city. You see salutes on some corners. Some people probably unsure of what all this pomp is about, this procession. But hopefully they do learn of whom it is about, because Officer Areanah Preston, quite a story to tell, of service, of great hope for the future, and ultimately of sacrifice. As again, we're watching this procession take place south down Western Avenue. Left the medical examiner's office about 20 minutes ago. Quick jaunt onto Leavitt and Harrison, then south on Western. And while Chopper 2 does a remarkable job to get the visuals of this, it certainly doesn't capture the full scene, which it can't do, but the ambiance, the natural sound, the city sounds as the L train passes. But if you've ever been on the ground floor of a procession like this, be it for any first responder let alone a firefighter, in this case a police officer. Sometimes the most profound sound is no sound at all. The ambiance of nothing but air.
So you're just going to head to the first district and go around?
So for those of you just joining us now at the bottom of the hour, just after 10:30 here, the shot on your right is ambulance 37. It contains the body of Areanah Preston, Chicago police officer proud. On the left, you see the Chicago flag, and it's 4 stars. That is the destination of the procession, Blake Lamb Funeral Home in Oak Lawn. We've spoken with a number of people who were friends with the beautiful and promising young police officer. One friend described her on social media as a humble, dedicated, helpful, and sophisticated soul. Helpful and sophisticated. That is a fascinating mix of adjectives, one you don't see typically abutted next to each other. Helpful and sophisticated. And that would certainly describe a young police officer. Helpful. She's a police officer, 24 years old. Sophisticated, though likely dreamt of more, doing greater things. Just graduated from law school. Wall fighting crime in the city of Chicago. Was about to get that Juris Doctorate on Saturday. And who knows what the future held. As we see ambulance 37 going south down Western Avenue, we know that future ended. 1:42 a.m. on Saturday, just after Officer Preston clocked out of her job, serving the city of Chicago just yards from her home. We don't know the full details of what exactly happened, but we know she was shot multiple times. I'm told by sources she may have also gotten a number of shots off. A victim of violence in Chicago, now leading to this procession on this Tuesday morning. If we do have and can go to our friend Derek Peters in Chopper 2, I'd like to do that now. And if Derek could tell us just about where he's at and give us kind of a time estimate on our arrival at the funeral home, that'd be great. Derek, can we send it up to you?
Yes, you can. Hey, Brad. The front end of the procession is now just crossing over 47th Street, Chicago's Gage Park neighborhood. Again, it's going to continue southbound on Western Avenue all the way to 103rd Street. So we are rapidly approaching about the halfway mark of this procession. And as we've alluded to several times, the majority of the procession today, the vast majority, taking place on one street, which is Western Avenue. About 11.5 miles that Officer Preston's body will travel today down Western Avenue. And even though that's just one street, it contains such a diversity of Chicago along that one street, this one stretch of one street on Western Avenue. We've gone by residential, commercial areas, all manner, all sorts of people, all walks of life that Officer Preston's body has been transported past so far today. And Brad, as you've alluded to multiple times, the details of Officer Preston's death are still unclear, are still being investigated and being revealed, but the details of her life are really quite clear based on what we know of Areanah Preston, what we've heard from her family and loved ones. It paints a very clear picture of an extremely motivated young woman who cared deeply about being a public servant. Words like sophisticated, words like helpful, words like humble have been often used by family and friends to describe Officer Preston. And as I said before, those little breadcrumbs, the nuggets that we know of her life, graduating Loyola University with a master's degree in jurisprudence while working as a full-fledged member of the Chicago Police Department already for several years, even at the young age of 24. Those details really tell you all you need to know about her as a person and what a magnificent force for good she was in this city, and what an outsized impact, an outsized positive impact she's had on her community and those around her in just her short time here on Earth. So the front end of the procession now traveling past about 50, I believe that's 55th Street, and we'll continue southbound along Western Avenue until we reach 103rd, where it will then make a turn and continue on 103rd just a short ways to the Blake Lamb Funeral Home at 103rd and Cicero. We will continue to bring you the sights as it makes its way through that route. For now, Brad, I'll send it back to you.
Okay, Derek, thank you. And if we could, I don't know if we can without having Derek's mic on, but keep the ambiance of Chopper 2 up, just to give the sense that there will be several choppers, of course, over this procession as it happens. This escort for Officer Areanah Preston, she there is in the far screen, now front screen as we hone in on a shot there. In ambulance number 37 from the Chicago Fire Department. As Derek said, the lion's share of this procession taking place on Western Ave, and from the medical's office, examiner's office, in the Rush Hospital area to Oak Lawn, 10, 11 miles along Western, really tells the story of Chicago. A remarkable tapestry of different communities. And you see at each intersection, or just about, officers or other first responders saluting. Some places, traffic having to halt for a moment. Maybe they know the story, maybe they don't. Areanah Preston was 24 years old. Just about to graduate from law school. A Chicago police officer for 3 years. When she clocked out, arrived home 1:42 a.m. Avalon Park neighborhood Saturday morning and was shot several times. And what by all appearances, per sources, was a random, not a targeted robbery. There's also some investigation now into why it took some 30-odd minutes for police to respond to one of their own. Of course, they didn't know that was one of their own. But the shot spotter pinged at 1:42, notifying authorities of shots fired. It was then later that we're told the officer's Apple Watch sent out a distress call to 911 that something was amiss. Here's a quote from a former officer, former communicator, a 911 dispatcher, explaining this delay in the response. The city's going to have to look into this. Those things do happen on a constant basis throughout our city, and we have to correct those issues if we want full accountability. That came from former 911 dispatcher Keith Thornton. Remember Mr. Thornton's name? We certainly do. He answered countless 10-1 calls. That's what they're known as. Including the call of Officer Ella French, who was shot and killed in 2021. For those of us in news, it doesn't seem that long ago that we covered a procession much like this, as we see ambulance 37 from the Chicago Fire Department traversing the landscape of Chicago via Western Ave. It was all south from the medical examiner's office to 103rd Street to the Blake Lamb Funeral Home. I would imagine right now, per Derek Peters and Chopper 2, per his estimates of where things were, the procession is probably a good 10 minutes away there from Oak Lawn still. Passing by a couple of officers there. Officer Preston clearly had an ebullient personality. You could see her glow, an effervescence about her, a youth about her in her Instagram posts, as you see there. One officer saluting and holding that salute. Now a second officer holding that salute. There's a shot for you. Two officers holding salute as the body in ambulance number 37 passes by. As I was saying, not a lot of officers, not that I know, and aren't necessarily of a demographic that are heavy Instagram users, but Officer Preston was. Pictures of her in her cap and gown, assumedly preparing for graduation Saturday. She was going to become a lawyer. At least she got her Juris Doctorate. and with the motivation of someone who could handle dual roles of being a young Chicago police officer and graduating law school, would have certainly had no issue with a bar exam. But it's all speculation now. She is well, simply put, a victim of murder, crime, robbery, all gone wrong. Early Saturday morning, in what is sadly described as just yards from her home. If Derek is up there in Chopper 2, we're eventually going to have to cut away as our 11 o'clock crew gets ready for their newscast, Jim Williams and Marie Saavedra. But if Derek is there for one last minute, I'd like to find out where we're at, and if we can get Derek, that would be great. Derek, you there?
I am here. Hello, Brad. The front end of the procession is now near 67th Street, passing under a Chicago Fire Department ladder truck that is paying its respects as ambulance number 37 that is carrying the body of fallen CPD officer Areanah Preston passes by. I'm going to zoom out the camera just a little bit so we can get a better sense of how many vehicles and how much pomp and circumstance there is in this procession. A mile-long wall of flashing lights as we go past. And one of the reasons that processions such as these are important is that every day CPD officers, and this was especially true in Officer Preston's case, they make a difference in everyday Chicagoans' lives that we don't see. We don't recognize them making a difference in the moment. We may not even recognize them as individuals at all in that very moment. So it's important in the unfortunate circumstances like these that there's an opportunity for the public to take notice of officers like Officer Preston, those that have given literally everything that they have to give to this city, and to draw the attention of the everyday people that they helped. They may have not met all of these people, the people have not met the officer, but there's a mutual respect because of what that officer, in this case Officer Preston, represents. We're continuing down Western Avenue. They said should be around 73rd Street now at the front end. And we'll continue for 30 more blocks to 103rd Street. And then from there, it's just a short stretch on 103rd to the Blake Lamb Funeral Home at 103rd and Cicero. As we said, we know this route well. We've had to travel it far too often in recent months as we've honored many fallen first responders, both from the Chicago Police Department and the Chicago Fire Department. And unfortunately today, Areanah Preston's name is added to that list. Again, we're pulling into position now right over Western Avenue. And I'm going to try to widen the camera out a little bit and show you just how many cars are involved in this procession. As I said, it's hard to capture the scope of what's going on from the air, as we spend a lot of our time focused in on Ambulance 37, the transport vehicle.
Derek.
But it's when you widen out, you really get a scope of how large this procession is,
Yeah,
and how meaningful it is. Brad?
We do get a scope. I don't mean to interrupt you, my friend, but yes, we will take it from there. Thank you for your continued work, your sentiments. Derek said we got about another 25 blocks now. Got the ambulance right there. Chicago Fire Department, 37. Out now for approximately 40 to 45 minutes from the medical examiner's office to Blake Lamb Funeral Home in Oak Lawn. The funeral home located on West 103rd. Probably a good 20 blocks now away from the funeral home. Again, the transport taking place in ambulance 37 from the Chicago Fire Department. This all for one young, talented, promising Chicagoan. Slain police officer Areanah Preston. There's also a vigil today that is set for 6 p.m. That's at the 5th District Station. That's where she served. Roseland, Pullman, Calumet Park neighborhoods, etc. That district kind of abuts right up to Dalton, if I believe. That's where she was leaving work. Clocked out one final time. 24-year-old was shot around 1:42 a.m. on Saturday in the Avalon Park neighborhood. Just finished her shift and yards, quote, yards from her home. All attempts to save her life failed. The ebullient young firefighter, as one can see from her, rather police officer, as one can see from her Instagram post, was nothing but promise. Served the city as an officer since 21 years old. At 24, graduated law school, was just about to get that important piece of paper, that Juris Doctorate, on Saturday, this coming Saturday. That will come now, a week to the day after her murder. Our friends in Chopper 2 will continue to follow this procession. I'm going to sign off as the team gets ready for the 11 a.m. newscast. We'll have the latest from this, both on air and online. CBS News Chicago, our friends Jim Williams and Marie Saavedra. We appreciate you joining us here on CBS News Chicago. If you see a first responder, it goes without question, thank them. As we thank Officer Preston for her service. And God rest her soul.
Okay, live picture from us at the top of the 11 in 1 minute. Copy. Procession is approaching 87th Street now, 87th Street, just FYI. We're hot. Passing 91st Street, just FYI. Okay, copy. Almost there. Getting wonky? Yeah. Yeah, I see. Yeah, ask for a recliner. It's 103rd and Cicero. Yeah, because they're in their 11 o'clock news now. Yeah, they're taking our shot, but they haven't had me talk at all. All right, so pretty much right when they get to the funeral home. I wouldn't hold your breath on that. Can't have too much left in the chamber. past Pulaski now.